Her waking eyes adjusted to the return of a familiar world of lineations, visually distinguishable corners and ceilings and floors, all alive with varying hues and shades. A nurse stood at her bedside, dressed in white, but blue eyes and fox-red lips, and a green pen jutted from her breast pocket within close proximity to a pinkish triangular patch of subtle cleavage. Another nurse stood on the other side of her bed with egg yolk yellow blonde hair and intensely pink lipstick. Where was the odd and surreal white room? The room she'd been marooned in for what felt like a creeping infinity. Where was Tobias? She had seen Tobias. Hadn't she? Hadn't he spoken to her? He'd said, "Everything is going according to plan." What plan? Nothing but a dream. Nightmare? Some deeply disturbed manifestation of the fated doom of psychosis which was rapidly strangling her mental and conscious faculties wholesale. A peculiar itching in the grayest crevices of her mind told her it wasn't the product of a dream. A thick, black presence stuck to her consciousness like a tick sticks to folds of skin. And this parasite wedged its way deep inside of her. But color was back in the world, and, for now at least, that was something for her frail mortal hope to grasp onto and hold like a child embraces a comforting teddy bear. As if to reflect this more solidly, she clutched the off-white blanket tightly in her small fist. Before the white room, the last thing she recalled was the doctor informing her she was pregnant. That had not been much of a revelation, as she'd been speaking with her unborn son for days now. The doctor's test only proved to further confirm that Tobias wasn't merely a figment of her imagination. Inside of her little womb grew and thrived a baby that, if all she'd endured the last few days proved to be true, was alive and well somewhere in the distant future. And he'd discovered a miraculous way to communicate to her. And he had warned of the beast, which had definitely come for her and nearly killed her. She still wasn't sure how she'd gotten out of those woods. Had Shane rescued her? A whirling succession of still-shot images reeled through her mind suddenly, causing her to snap her head upward. And she remembered the other thing. The gem in her chest. Amy nervously looked down, fingering the neckline of her flimsy hospital gown to the side. There it was. Glowing. Bright red. No, more of a shadowy, flickering crimson. But oh, so beautiful. It swallowed her attention, soothing her consciousness.
Resist, else be damned. Must resist the Narkush mother. It is not for you. It is for your absolute annihilation.
By who? Who are you talking to, dear? The older nurse, Bobby, smiled down at her. I wasn't talking to anyone. Well, honey, you might not have been saying anything aloud, but your lips were moving. Is Tobias your boyfriend? The younger nurse asked as she checked Amy's vital signs.
How did you know his name?
The young nurse shook her head, sniggering in slight embarrassment.
I'm sorry. I took a lip reading class in Houston last year. I shouldn't have asked. He's not my boyfriend. He's my son.
Just past midnight. But how? Last she knew, it was just after 10. Where had the last 2 hours gone? And where was the doctor?
Did I fall asleep? You were just visiting with Roxy. Don't you remember?
No. She didn't remember. Last thing she remembered was the damn doctor telling her that she was pregnant. Shane was holding her hand, sitting on the bed. Where was Shane? Where had the last 2 hours gone? In the white room. Waiting in that sunless place. Stretching white deafened oblivion. That's where the last 2 hours had gone. Aunt Carol had gone through a fit of blackouts once too. Right before the crazy bugs carried off with her mind and sanity, and her sister, Gail, hauled her off to the nut house. Blackouts, lost time, waking dreams, delusional illusions, and Aunt Carol never returned to the real world. Her head got forever filled with the tinkle-twinkles of far-off, untouchable objects flying in the air with her own subconscious constructs. And Amy knew for sure that her own mind was already pouring the foundation for a grotesque mansion full of ghastly strangeness, like alabaster worlds hewn out of a sprawling vaporous mountain. A thin membrane that tethered her to this space of colorization would soon snap. Her physical body would remain in a hospital bed, in a psychiatric ward, a big stupid smile on her face, applesauce drooling down her chin, but her consciousness always slogging through a swamp out of time, far flung into the nether regions of psychosis, a child in the dark forest, broken bramble, and savage briars, running, always running from the wolf. Bobby, checking the IV in Amy's arm, smiled deeply and patted Amy on the back of her hand.
You'll be feeling fine soon, sweetie. Dr. Midgard has you on a steady drip of oxytocin. I don't want to go back. Back there.
Amy squirmed, muscles restless. Dull fluorescent light bulbs became as bright as runway beacons. On a flight surrounded by gray clouds, climbing higher, 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 into the whiteness above. The older nurse patted the pillow.
You don't worry yourself none. Probably just having flashbacks to your harrowing night. You've been through a heck of an ordeal.
A painful swell of loneliness made her eyes bubble with tears. Somehow, she knew the worst was yet to come. Even though Shane had said Amy was okay, Scooter couldn't shake the feeling that she was not okay. Hours ago, Shane had called. The witching howl of a dog echoed over the phone. 3 times. It was the sound of death coming. That's what Amy's superstitions preached to her anyway. Death. He envisioned driving a black carriage pulled by one fierce Cerberus-like hound, trotting triumphantly and snarling raging hellfire from its inflamed blackened nostrils. It reminded him of a poem they'd read in class once. because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. And the Cerberus heads all reared toward eternity, howling once per head, a trumpet sounding the coming doom, and to open the gates of oblivion, where eternity would embrace the dead. After he'd hung up the phone, Scooter had rushed to Amy and Shane's bedroom. House rules set by Amy and Shane both forbid him to be in their room without permission, but he'd rarely abided by that silly rule when none were home but himself. He scooped up Amy's pink nightshirt from the corner nearest her side of the bed. Scooter lifted the silky shirt, holding it high like an enchanted scepter in his grasp, and gently brought the fabric to his face. Inhaled a fragrance of wet rose petal sweetness laced with feminine spiciness that tingled the back of his nostrils before reaching his throat. A vaporous tease. A primal roaring ruthlessly racked his mind. A dragging sense of shambling dread toiled over his consciousness. In his mind's eye, he saw Amy. He felt her. Intangible waves death enshrouded her. He had no clue how he knew this, but he did. Scooter tossed the shirt back to the floor, as if the fabric was some kind of conduit for these fermented vibes. He quickly left the room. Just his overactive imagination running him through, and possibly his ridiculous obsession for her. And he could admit that his feelings for Amy were ridiculous. Intellectually, he knew this. She was in love with his brother, and his brother was in love with her. But this wisdom was at constant battle with his aching heart and, dare he think it, his raging hormones. He loved Amy. He really, really loved her. But a dark entity had latched itself onto her. A very dark and ominous presence. Scooter shook the harrowing thought from his mind and went to his room. He flicked the light switch off as he passed through the doorway. Fumbling, he made his way to the bed. He lay on his back, hands laced behind his head. He looked through the darkness and toward the ceiling. Another sense of dread seized him. Scooter sat up to find a silhouetted figure standing beside his bed. Two oval orbs. Its eyes glowed purple. The dome light over Scooter's head turned on. Clearly now he could see Zach standing beside his bed. Scooter narrowed his eyes at the switch on the wall, all the way across the room. He turned his nervous gaze toward Zach. "Your eyes?" Zach batted his lashes. "You like?" "No, I mean, they glowed. Purple." Zach sat on the bed. "More of a hazel, actually, but thank you for noticing." Scooter jumped off the other side of the bed. "What are you doing here?" "I came for your allegiance." Zach gave a slow, almost seductive wink. "No more flirting. No more games." Scooter's pulse jumped. His heart hammered. A cold sweat pebbled his forehead. A most foreboding fear gripped him. Personified evil. Why had he not seen it in Zach before now? A slow smile twitched at Zach's lips. "You must swear it on your soul." "I swear nothing, you crazy fuck." Zach stood. He waved one finger dismissively. Now,
That's no way to talk to the being who can get you the one thing you want but think you could never have. Scooter wiped beads of cold sweat from his brow. I have no idea what you're talking about. Amy. A wave of dizziness blurred Scooter's sight. A miniature tornado twisted inside his belly. Sour breaths hitched in his throat. I don't feel so good. You're a very special boy. Very special indeed. Scooter gulped. A hard ball tasting of spoiled pork coated his constricting throat, threatening a bad hyperventilation episode. He'd not had that kind of terrible feeling since he was 7 or 8. He squeaked his eyes open, trying to focus on the blurry bureau, at the dagger Amy had given him. You have powers. Very rare gifts. Scooter felt his body sway. Did you drug me? A shaky whisper. Open your eyes. Zach's voice imitated that of Scooter's shaky whisper. Scooter hadn't even been aware that he'd shut his eyes again, tight, to block out the world. Like a little kid who hides from the monsters under his blankets. Could he throw the blankets over his head to keep Zach away? No, probably not. Zach was real, and Scooter knew he'd just yank the covers off of him and stare at him with those eerie eyes. Fuck you. Open your eyes! Even though he didn't want to obey, something compelled Scooter to open his eyes wide. A blurry and dark silhouette, Scooter knew to be Zach, stood at the foot of the bed. Zach licked his chops and snapped his fingers, and in an instant the blurriness vanished. Clearly, he could see through the haziness now. And it was no longer Zach standing at the end of the bed. It was Amy. And she was nude. Small, perky breasts. Puffy nipples erect, pointing right at him. A triangle of blonde hair traced the folds of her sex. Her bare, naked sex. Her pussy. The word ringing inside his head. So many, many times he'd dreamed of seeing her this way. And it was finally happening. Scooter reluctantly lifted his gaze to her face. A sultry glimmer in her eyes, and sensual red lips parted to reveal the tip of her teasing tongue as it circled her mouth. One hand palmed the bed, and then the other. Slowly, she crawled toward him. Hardening, his erection pushed against the thin cotton of his boxers, and Scooter felt blood pumping into his shaft, making it throb. His gaze continued to yo-yo from Amy's face to those perfect little tits, to her hot, naked pussy. And now, by the glow of the screensaver on his desktop, he could see that the strips of blonde hair between her legs glistened with fresh moisture. There was nothing else in the world that he wanted more than this. But it couldn't be. This isn't real. An invisible energy, in the shape of a large calloused hand, thrust him backward, until his back aligned against the headboard. He looked down at his own body. His own naked body. Amy knelt between his widespread legs, those intensely erotic eyes taking in his stiff cock the way a predator takes in its prey. In one hand, she took his erection. She opened her mouth, leaned over his crotch,
and swallowed him with one depraved plunge. Amy's warm, soft lips touched his balls. Scooter couldn't even see his cock. It was buried all the way in the back of Amy's tight throat. Scooter felt a naked body behind him. He turned and looked over his shoulder. It was Zach. Zach's cock twitched against the small of Scooter's back. His legs came around Scooter's abdomen, crossing at the ankles. Scooter turned his gaze back toward Amy. With what seemed to be expert precision, she worked his cock in and out of her soft mouth. She gently but firmly gripped him, easing her hand up and down the shaft with ever so subtle tugs. Satin lips, wet and supple, slid along his length. Throat muscles clenched around the cap of his cock, and with a physical tingle, Scooter just knew that Amy was tasting his pre-cum as it flowed freely, coating the back of her throat. Zach's hands cupped Scooter's pecs. Fingers pinched at his erect nipples before gliding up his body, up his neck and caressing his temples. Zach laid a kiss on one of Scooter's cheeks. The attention Zach was paying to him caused Scooter to groan and his hips to buck, shoving his pulsing cock deep into Amy's throat. But she didn't gag, only giggled. Scooter's cock grazed the back of Amy's throat and she held it locked there, breathing hot air around his meaty shaft. Tender breasts pressed into his thighs, hard nipples burning into his skin like pebbles from a fire pit. Scooter arched his back, shoveling himself deeper into Amy's willing and wet mouth. Zach's hand slid down Scooter's body, hands cupping Scooter's pecs once again. Swear your allegiance. Swear it on your soul. Zach hissed in Scooter's ear, and the hot breath on his lobe made him buck harder. Amy's head bobbed. She moaned, a deep and throaty sound that reverberated down Scooter's spine and to his anus. If there was a hell, Scooter was going there, but he didn't care. Feels so... Forgive me. Zach's lips grazed Scooter's ear. Nothing to forgive. You deserve happiness too. He inclined his head, gesturing down Scooter's naked form. She can give you happiness, yes? Yes. The orgasm rolled and rolled and rolled. Scooter needed release. He might die without it. Never before had he needed to come so badly. I can make you come. Do you want to come? Oh. Mouth gaped, drool slid down Scooter's chin. Hooded lids, eyes tired with lust, chest heaving with sporadic breaths. Yes, please. Swear your allegiance. Swear it on your soul. Amy slid her hands under Scooter's ass. She squeezed. Her mouth slid down his length. Her small throat tightened around his pulsing, dripping cock. A finger slid between his ass cheeks, prodding at his opening, pushing inside. Inside a hole never explored before, but the intruding finger was eagerly welcomed by Scooter's sucking anal muscles, absorbing her slender finger deep inside of him. mouth tugging, tongue gliding, tickling along his young teenage cock, and that white-hot, rigid finger probing his inner depths until it reached a special spot.
Yes. Yes.
Yes, what? Saliva dripped down his cock.
I swear allegiance on my very soul.
Amy's finger pressed firmly on the special spot. Scooter's seed erupted so brutally that his whole body convulsed, and his hands latched onto Zach's waist, streaming. Strand after sticky strand of semen bursting out of him in waves, endlessly pouring into Amy's. Scooter's eyes went wide. His chest heaved with a gag. Zach looked up from between Scooter's spread legs. White ribbons of thick cum dripped from the corners of Zach's parted lips. With another seraphic smile, Zach fingered a glob of the frothy cream from his pointy chin and licked it clean.
That is good. Joseph Rollins was right about you.